webinar for today. So good morning, good afternoon, depending on your time zone on this Tuesday. My name's Tracy Collum. I'm the Associate Dean for the Graduate School at Idaho State University. And I'm also the coordinator for webinars for our NAGAP Education Committee. So if you have ideas or want to volunteer to be a speaker for any of our webinars, I would love to hear from you and love to hear some ideas from you. I have a few announcements before we get into our webinar for today. One, you may have seen in your email if you're a NAGAP member that our annual summit that is held in April is extending submissions. If you would like to submit an abstract, a presentation, a panel, you have until October 15th, so almost 2 more weeks to submit that so you can be part of the annual summit and have your presentation reviewed there. There are limited spaces, so you want to make sure you get that in early so it can be reviewed with the other submissions. Feel free to get with a group, a partner to do your presentations together, and you can submit that by October 15th, which is next Friday. So make sure you go on the NAGAP website to get that link. And then just a plug for our webinar that'll come up in 2 weeks. On October 19th, it'll be our normal webinar topic area where we will be discussing increasing graduate student enrollment through efficient marketing and recruitment strategies. And this one will be presented by Dr. James Bartlett, Dr. Michelle Bartlett, and Dr. Carol Warren, who have a very successful educational cohort at North Carolina State University. I am biased because they were my advisors and classmates in the program I graduated from, but they have been very successful over the last decade in bringing that program to fruition. So it will be highly intuitive for NAGAP members to attend to help your own marketing and recruitment strategies, see if you can glean some ideas off of them. So with that, we're going to start on today's webinar. And some of you may know the ETS, Educational Testing Systems, has been a sponsor throughout the year for NAGAP over the years, and they sponsor several webinars with us and give us some very valuable information as we work on understanding applications and holistic admission and other areas that can help graduate schools. So today, we have understanding application criteria to make better admissions decisions. And with that, we have Dr. John Augusto, who is the Associate Dean for the Strategic Initiatives in the College of Arts and Sciences at Georgia State University. In his role, he oversees the implementation of the college to career efforts within the college, as well as community and industry engagement. He also serves as an ETS graduate education advisor. And previously, he worked at the University of Kansas, where he provided key leadership in graduate education. So he's going to present our webinar today. As we go through the webinar, if you have questions, please list them in the Q&A section below, so that way we can all see them. And most likely, we will answer those questions towards the end of the webinar. So with that, John, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Tracy. I am super excited to be with my NAGAP colleagues here today. I've got a really jam-packed session, but I've got plenty of time of Q&A afterwards. So as was stated, please be sure and post your questions in the Q&A. We will have a time for discussion. I find that the discussion is sometimes the most fruitful interaction I can have when I'm doing these types of events. So I'm very much looking forward to it. I want to talk a little bit today about ETS's engagement with the graduate education community. I think back to my own experience as a NAGAP member many years ago, around 1999. I started working, I was the research chair and working with ETS on looking at the ways in which we use the internet to do graduate admissions and graduate recruitment. And that was 20 years ago. So a lot has changed since then, but what hasn't changed is our partnership, NAGAP's partnership with ETS and the commitment that's been there for many years. But along with that, I want to talk about evidence in our application portfolios. Many of us are talking to our graduate faculty members about getting ready for the recruitment cycle for fall 22. Some of us are in the heat of a recruiting cycle in terms of spring 22. So we definitely want to have a conversation about what's the evidence we bring to those application portfolios. I'm going to spend the bulk of today's time talking about the purpose, the benefits, the drawbacks, and how do we mitigate some of those drawbacks when we're looking at evidence in our application portfolios. Evidence like undergraduate transcripts and the GPA, GRE scores, personal statement, statement of purpose, our letters of recommendation, any type of research experience, or any type of resume, or interviews, the last one being interviews that are so important and really give us insight into our applicant pool. So like I said, we've got a lot to cover today. We're going to leave time for questions and answers. So let's jump in and get started. As I mentioned, my story about my partnership with ETS and my partnership with NAGAP, this is as a reminder, ETS is a nonprofit organization whose mission it is to really enhance the quality and equity in education, with over 70 years of experience in educational research, developing and administering and scoring millions of tests in over 180 countries, and really providing a substantial and significant annual investment in researching solutions that are improving educational outcomes for all. This was mentioned, I was a graduate education advisor. I'm in the Office of Graduate Education Engagement. I'm delighted to be working with a group of people you see here on the screen. Wonderful individuals, former graduate deans. Terry Ackerman's a distinguished professor in educational measurement from the University of Iowa. We all bring that boots on the ground experience so that we're out not only just talking with our ETS colleagues, but we're out talking with folks like you who work in graduate admissions day in, day out, talking about what are the pain points, what are your concerns going forward, coming out of COVID, what does graduate recruitment look like, what does graduate enrollment management look like, and what are the issues in which ETS can partner with you to help you get a diverse equity and inclusion lens around your graduate enrollment management and ensure that you meet your graduate enrollment goals as well. I definitely want to make sure we spend some time talking about when we're looking for evidence in our application portfolios, what it is we're actually looking for. But before we do that, I have a poll questions. So if we could pull up the first poll question. Wonderful. The poll question is, what is currently the most important to your graduate program? Hover over, click on your answer. You get one choice. We'll give folks a minute to jump in and answer that question. Give everybody about 5 more seconds and we'll end the poll and look at the results. All right. So what's currently most important for your graduate program or graduate programs? Not surprisingly, increasing the number of applicants. We all are under pressure. I know here at Georgia State, we've been talking with our graduate faculty members about that very topic, ensuring that we are looking for strategies that are going to drive up the number of applicants to our graduate programs. Funding is always a concern, definitely. Increasing diversity now more than ever. We're located here in Atlanta, Georgia, in the South. We're still seeing that we have work to do in terms of increasing the diversity of our applicant pool. So definitely top of mind for a lot of folks. A lot of programs are struggling with this, talking with different individuals about what are the best strategies, what are the best ways to approach this. Definitely part of our consideration going forward. Okay, second poll question. If we could pop that up. Thank you, Christy. This poll question says, have you or your programs mapped the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities needed to successfully navigate your graduate programs into each element of your holistic admissions portfolio. So the evidence you collect, have you mapped that to what are the elements of making your program a success, the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to be a successful graduate of your program. Give everybody about 10 more seconds to answer that. They're flying in as we speak. All right. Clearly, this is reflective of a lot of programs I speak with across the country. You know, a lot of faculty, a lot of staff haven't sat down and really had a really in-depth discussion or set of discussions around kind of what's the knowledge, skills, and abilities our students need to gain, or what evidence do we need to find when we're looking at applicants so that we know they'll be successful graduates in our program. But let's go ahead and jump in. Those are great responses. We've got a lot to cover, and I want to jump into right in that. So what is that evidence we're looking for? When we talk about evidence and the things we're looking for, what exactly is that evidence? I think we're looking for things like cognitive skills, right? Can this person think through a problem? Can they work through the academic curriculum? I think some of the evidence we're looking at is what's their academic background? Sometimes we look at the undergrad GPA. Sometimes we look at the courses taken, courses in the major. Are there personal attributes that we can identify that we think will help that student be successful? We talk a lot about grit and determination when you're looking at being successful in graduate programs. And how do we attribute that based on the materials we collect? Is there a fit with the program goals and mission? A lot of times, sometimes graduate programs have not done the due diligence to really understand what are the goals of their program and how might our applicants fit into that. We just say, oh, well, that student looks like they would do well here. That student looks like they wouldn't do well here. But do we really know why that is? Do we have an understanding of those goals? The interest and passions of our applicants. You know, we see that in a statement of purpose or maybe a letter of recommendation. What really sets them on fire? Why are they interested in doing this work? And of course, for a lot of our programs that are professionally oriented, work experience becomes vital. For those that are more research oriented, things like undergraduate research is also a good facsimile for that work experience that we're looking for. So when we talk about this idea of evidence, we need to make sure that we put kind of a social economic status around that as well, a wraparound idea, if you will, because we know social economic advantages extend to virtually all parts of the admissions measures. Things like undergrad institution. We know, for example, nationally speaking, students from lower SES, lower social economic status, tend to go to public universities versus private universities. We know that undergraduate grades can be affected by the number of hours you work outside of the classroom. And we know that students from a lower SES tend to work more hours, which then has an impact on their undergraduate grades. We know who writes the letters of recommendation and who has the ability to gain that time on task with a faculty member to get that strong letter of recommendation can have an impact in terms of social economic status, GRE scores. We've got some evidence around that as well, and admissions essays. The important thing to remember is this study out of Stanford shows that results show that essays have a stronger correlation to reported household income than SAT scores. And we need to make sure that when we're making decisions based on our data, we need to make sure we're informed, but we also understand that social economic status impacts all parts of the application criteria used to evaluate all of our applicants. I think that's a key and critical part. Again, social economic status impacts all the application criteria used to evaluate all of the applicants. So if we start to look at what is their evidence, what is that evidence, and where is that evidence, we can start to do some mapping like you see here. So on the top there, you see the things we talked about: cognitive skills, academic background, personal statements. On the left, what you see is things that we collect, like the undergraduate transcript, the GPA, the GRE scores, personal statement, letters of recommendation, so forth and so on. And we start to map and say, when we look at things like work experience, we can see what that student's work experience is like, what that applicant's work experience is like on things like the personal statement or the statement of purpose. We can see that maybe in their research experience or on their resume or in the interviews that might come out, how their work experience ties into their application for our graduate program. All ways in which we document and demonstrate the evidence we're looking for in that particular area. Another thing I want to make sure we consider is international students. Many of our graduate programs have had for many, many years a strong supply of international applicants. And I think when we start to think about individuals who come to our applicant pool from foreign institutions, we want to make sure that we all, as a program, as a university, have an acceptable from authoritative reference, for example, with the International Handbook of University Handbooks and other reputable publications. We want to make sure there's a strong transcript evaluation. When I was at Kansas, we set it up so that we trained our staff in-house to do transcript evaluation. And if we felt like, or the graduate faculty member felt like, oh, you've misinterpreted that evaluation, we would send it out to a third-party provider who would do that evaluation. And we always wanted to make sure that we had our staff trained to the highest standards so that we could do a high quality evaluation of that. Because when we did those evaluations, whether at Georgia State or at Kansas, what we're looking for is things like a standardized test that measures reading, writing, speaking, and reading comprehension, all the things that are part of the English proficiency quality. We make sure we get some speech samples involved with that. Some of our programs here at Georgia State do in-person interviews. Sometimes they'll do video interviews. And we definitely want to make sure we collect and review essays as part of our English proficiency evaluation. I want to spend the bulk of today, though, talking about purpose, benefits, what are some of the drawbacks with the evidence we collect, and how to mitigate some of the drawbacks that we're involved with. I want to start with the undergraduate transcript and GPA. Clearly, the purpose is to demonstrate it's an indication of experience, what courses they've taken, and to a certain extent, academic ability. We know there are things like growth over time, pursuit of challenging coursework, passion for a particular subject matter. For some students, that they may have a well-roundedness in terms of their general education and their major specific courses. They may be able to show cross-disciplinary interests. They may have classes in biology and chemistry, for example, to have a biochemistry focus, if you will. We also know that with GPA specifically, this is cited from graduateinflation.com, over a period of time, we've seen an increase in the average GPA for all universities. For public schools, we've seen a higher for one increase, but for private schools, they started higher and they've continued to be higher as time has gone on. It's important also to think about perception of institutional rigor, differing grading scales especially for international students. How is your graduate program going to handle the pass-fail options due to COVID-19 and this general grade inflation is all? Again, it's important that you keep this in mind and that you inform your graduate faculty members about this so that they keep it in their mind as you move forward when we start to think about how we're looking at GPA and the institutions where those GPAs are generated. It's important that we examine in context, we read between the lines, and we look for evidence of seeking challenging coursework while excelling or showing significant academic growth. When I work with students, I always talk about it's okay if you have a little bit of sophomore slump, but by the end of your sophomore or junior, senior year, we want to see an increasing GPA going forward. So we have our third question here, which is, let Christy pull that up. Which, if any, of these skills/abilities are important for your students to do well in your program? And this is a multiple choice, so you can pick the ones that matter most to you, or you can take the easy road and take all the above. Give everybody about 10 more seconds on this one. All right, we've got the results. So more than half of you picked all the above. While this is not a trick question, the question is put with some deliberation. If you think about what the GRE measures, things like critical thinking, reading comprehension, analysis of data, information, ability to understand information from charts and tables, all those things are what the GRE measures. So we put this poll question in mind because we really want folks to think about, what does the GRE do? So the purpose of the GRE is to assess the cognitive skills of an applicant, indicate graduate level readiness, and provide a standardized objective measure of an applicant's verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, critical thinking, and analytical writing skills. And this is the essence of the purpose of the GRE. I think it's really important, whether it's the GRE, the GPA, the letters of recommendation, we clearly understand what's its purpose in our graduate admissions process. Let's go dive into each of the three areas. The verbal reasoning measure is the assessment that measures an individual's ability to comprehend and synthesize written materials, including the ability to identify the author's assumptions, summarize texts, and distinguish from minor points, understand the meaning of words, sentences, and entire text, and understand the relationship between words and concepts. When we look at the quantitative reasoning measure, again, a separate measure made to look separate, we're looking at a candidate's ability to reason quantitatively, including understanding, interpreting, analyzing quantitative information, and understanding the basic concepts of things like arithmetic, algebra, geometry, and data analysis. These are picked because those basic concepts translate into doing quantitative work in many graduate programs. Third measure, the analytical writing measure, looks at skills critical for success in every graduate discipline. You know, I spent a lot of time talking to graduate faculty members, and a lot of times, whether it was at Kansas, now at Georgia State, they'll say, you know, one of the things we look at in our graduate admissions process, especially at the doctoral level, is will the student struggle to write a dissertation? And the analytical writing measure can help get some insight into that student's writing ability, because it looks at two separately timed tasks. Take a position on an issue, develop an evidence-based argument, and evaluate the logical soundness of someone else's argument. It really, if you drill down, looks at articulating, supporting complex ideas, examine claims and accompanying evidence, constructing and evaluating arguments. These are all the things that, whether you're writing a thesis, whether you're writing for a project, whether you're writing for a dissertation, are all part of those skills, all part of that knowledge that you need to be a successful graduate student. Some of the benefits of using the GRE are that it's a common benchmark to compare to applicants. If an applicant takes a GRE test in Atlanta, Georgia, and another applicant takes the GRE test in Seattle, Washington, even though there's 3 hours difference, the difference is that it's a common benchmark. It gives applicants the opportunity to exhibit graduate readiness. It's the only part of the component that's research-based. It's the only part that goes under a rigorous fairness review, and it's only the one that adheres to professional standards brought about by faculty who do educational research and overseen by a board of graduate deans. Some of the drawbacks is that its tendency to overweight and use as a cutoff score. Many faculty I know at Georgia State, many faculty I've seen at the University of Kansas and other places will say, give me the GPA, give me the GRE scores, and I'll create a cut score, and that's how I do it. And using cut scores is not encouraged in terms of working with a GRE. The tendency is to combine scores, right? Verbal reasoning, quantitative reasons are two separate tests. They need to remain separate. Those scores should be separate. Test takers have varying time and resources to invest in preparation. If I've got a student who's got to take a full course load of 15 credit hours, who's working 30, 35 hours a week outside the classroom and preparing for the GRE versus a student who's taking 12, 15 credit hours and not working outside the classroom, that person has more time to invest in terms of preparation. For flex and group differences, which can be misinterpreted as test bias. Group differences are there, but they should not be misinterpreted as test bias. Some of the ways to mitigate these drawbacks is to focus on scores that are the most relevant measure or measures. And we'll talk about that when we talk about rubrics. Using one element in a holistic review of an application, embracing holistic admissions and definitely using a rubric, which we'll talk more about, putting too much predictive emphasis on GRE scores. I see this on my campus where faculty say, well, the GRE score doesn't predict if a student's going to write a journal article. Okay, there's not much that's going to predict. No score can predict whether that student's going to do enough research, be able to publish in time, to be able to publish that research into a journal article. And then the last part of mitigating that is alternative application review process. I talk to a lot of programs and who have that large volume of applications. I don't know if there's anyone on the call today, for example, from supporting or working with a clinical psychology program, because they're a program that nationwide tends to get a number of applicants. But when reviewing that combination of quantitative information from applicants to make that kind of first round initial decisions, I've been talking to graduate programs about using it as like a stool, a four-legged stool. So for example, using maybe a verbal reasoning score range and an analytical writing score range, along with an overall GPA and GPA in the last two fields, as a way to kind of sort your that large applicant pool. There's a number of ways to look at that. So maybe it's looking at a GRE score range for quantitative, maybe it's looking at foundational courses, and then maybe it's putting some quantitative information around your letters of recommendation. Multiple sources to give that initial first review to help make those first kind of first look of that large applicant pool to help you deal with and move through that large volume of applications. I mentioned this earlier, and I think it's a great time to talk about this. I know a lot of folks are going to using a rubric as part of their holistic admissions process, and I applaud you for doing that. I think it's invaluable for faculty reviewers to have that, but I think a lot of times faculty struggle with how to create that rubric as part of their review of the applications. I do think it allows a program to value with points things that they want to see more of and things they want to see less of. And you can recommend actions based on a total score range. A rubric will never admit a student. Students are admitted through the documentation, deliberation, and decision-making process of that admissions committee. Fortunately, holisticadmissions.org has a source of great information around rubric examples, and you can download that off the website, and we'll give you that as a follow-up. But to help you kind of think through some of these ideas about rubrics, I'm giving you this example rubric, and I'll walk you through this as for our illustrative purposes. So if you look at the rubric here, what you're seeing is a graduate program, a PhD program, and one of the things that it values is a student, an applicant coming in who's had some research experience. So on the far left, you see it's valuing undergraduate research to a maximum of 5 points, and you get 3 points if you have a year of experience of undergraduate research or work as an internship doing research. You get 2 points if you have 1 year of undergraduate research, and you can have 1 to 2 points if you have a publication or a poster or you won an award. That's a great opportunity for students to do undergraduate research. When I was at Kansas, I spent part of my time there, part of my 25 years there. I was the founding director for our Center for Undergraduate Research. And here's what I knew at Kansas, and here's what I know nationally. If you look at who gets involved with undergraduate research, what you see a lot of times are students who come from a higher socioeconomic status, students who come from the majority rather than the minority in terms of the student population. So it's really important that we also put the lens of the diversity lens in there and say, yes, undergraduate research is important, but we also know that students from underrepresented backgrounds tend not to be involved in undergraduate research at the same level as our majority students. So this program is also going to look at things like letters of recommendation, work experience. They're going to put a max of 3 points on that. Undergrad curriculum, they're going to want to make sure that they have the right courses. And if they're taking any challenging courses, they might give an extra point for that. And then that range for the GPA also gives them a maximum of 4 points. On the right side, what you see are things like personal statement with a max of 3 points, and then a breakdown of the 3 parts of the GRE with an emphasis on the quantitative and analytical. Now, another program might say, you know what? We're going to emphasize the verbal reasoning as maybe 2 points, and we're going to flip that and make quantitative and analytical 1 point. It's what the program values, putting a point system in place to show those values so that when an applicant's reviewed, that applicant goes through the review process with a rubric and gains a total score. And that's where the committee starts its deliberation and says, this group was, came in this score range. This group came in this score range. One last point to make is if you see the rubric here, you note that there's a score range for the GRE. So let's look at quantitative reasoning with a max of 2 points, 164 to 170 get you 2 points, 160 to 163 get you 1 point, and less than 142, get you a negative point. So what that program has done is looked at their data and said, okay, this was the average GRE score over 5-7 years, and this is how we created this range. I think it's important to have a robust range to give folks a chance to see them as clusters and to make sure you understand that the difference between a 164 and a 165 or 166 on the GRE isn't 2 points, it's the range. So it's really important that we get that range in place, looking at our previous data to help us build that going forward. I mentioned this earlier and I want to talk about it now, this alternative review process. I think there are times in our graduate admissions process where we fall guilty to what we call framing bias. And I'll use my campus as an example. I'm located in downtown Atlanta. Georgia State's a beautiful campus in the heart of the city. But there are 2 other very well-known universities in the Atlanta area, Emory and Georgia Tech. And I always hear my faculty say the following: oh, well, they're from Georgia Tech. They're fine. That 3.5 from Georgia Tech is really like a 3.9 from Georgia Southern. And then that's a framing bias. You're saying this school, we see this school in a different light, even though we really can't compare the GPAs in any substantive way. We're already putting that in a different light versus that school in a different light. So some programs have gone away with withholding information like the undergrad GPA, withholding the GRE scores until they do a thorough review of the personal statements and do some initial interviews. There's a really good study about mitigating bias from Georgetown University School of Medicine, which is referenced here. We'll give you the link as well. It really gives a valuable insight to look and think about, like, how are we creating the framing process for our admissions process, and how can we mitigate any bias we're bringing into maybe interviewing or letters of recommendation or use of the GPA. I want to go back to some of the evidence we're collecting. The next one is the personal statement. It really is that opportunity for students to showcase their passions, their personality, and their potential. I always tell my students that document, that personal statement speaks for you to the admissions committee when you're not in the room. It puts a face on some of the more objective and quantitative credentials. It reminds reviewers that applicants are individuals with unique experiences, unique backgrounds, and points of view. I think some of the drawbacks is that it can be especially subjective and can be perceived very differently depending on the reviewer's background, preferences, and values. I'm from the Midwest, I'm from the Great Plains. I might see applicants, for example, in my graduate programs that are from the Great Plains higher than I would, let's say, from the Southwest, just because I have a certain perception, certain background towards schools in that area. Quality of responses are highly subjectable to the explicitness of the instructions. I always say, good questions get you good answers. If you don't have good questions, you may not be getting good answers. So some of the ways to mitigate that, definitely have some of your current students read the applications directions. Make sure the students in your program can understand it so that your applicants can as well. Make sure that the personal statement provides insight on the applicant's ability to be persistent and resilient. Good questions can get you good answers. Consider using descriptive rubrics to delineate specific criteria. And that really gets at kind of the essence of what that personal statement is asking for. And that descriptive rubric can look for that specific evidence. And targeted elicit information from the admissions committee seeking. What exactly are we trying to draw from the personal statement? What are the aspects of the personal statement we're trying to draw from as part of our admissions rubric? That statement of purpose, well, that's the reason why they're applying to your graduate program in a very specific way. It helps reviewers understand the experiences and how the student is prepared for advanced graduate study. It really helps the reviewer decide, is this really a good fit based on what that student's professional goals are, and understand that applicants' career plans. This is how they see themselves in your graduate program and their career plans moving forward. I think some of the drawbacks is that a student may not understand the purpose unless the instructions are very clear. They may not, the reviewer may not agree with the applicant's career goals. For example, if a applicant to a PhD program says, I'm looking forward to completing my PhD at your graduate program so that I can go work in industry or for a nonprofit, and that faculty member's view is, no, you come to a PhD program so we can get you an academic job, there might be a disconnect there. Oftentimes they're heavily coached and edited. Guilty. I have coached a lot of students at Georgia State and at the University of Kansas about their statement of purpose. And I can tell you, after overseeing an office of national fellowships where we coached those students and their writing and had the multiple review levels of those essays, those statements of purposes, they are coached, they are heavily edited. Some of the ways to think about that is to make sure the statement of purpose aligns with the program goals, provide that clear instructions so that you get good content from that statement. Make sure that you have several reviewers reading each statement, and again, using that rubric to evaluate the statement of purpose. Letters of recommendation are the unique part of this graduate admissions process, in that they are a third-party assessment and endorsement, and they can really get at the ability for our applicants to succeed. Some of the benefits is that they can look at the previous achievements of that particular applicant and that applicant's potential to succeed, and they give concrete examples of some of the subjective traits we might pick up in other places in our application process. I think some of the drawbacks are that they are highly subjective and they are very tend to positive bias. Oh, this letter came from Dr. Smith, and Dr. Smith is at Harvard, so that student must be an outstanding student. They are prone to gender bias. There has been numerous studies done around gender bias on who writes the letter of recommendation. Some of the letters are written by students themselves. I've had to have conversations with faculty about that, where they're just asking the student asks them to write a letter. The faculty member response is, you write the letter and send it to me and I'll sign it and then move it on. And that's not really a strong letter of recommendation. And the reviewers tend to favor letters from people they know and from prestigious institutions. Some of the ways to mitigate that, make sure you have specific language used and specific examples. Consider providing a standard form with metrics. I think a lot of programs are going this direction, which is just give a standardized recommendation form with a little bit of room to add some verbiage in there, maybe a statement about the applicant's ability to succeed, things like that. Diverse group of reviewers, absolutely. And again, a rubric to evaluate this letter of recommendation based on the instructions provided to the recommender. Resumes and research experience, again, show how they've practically applied ideas and concepts learned in the classroom into a co-curricular or extracurricular experience. Really allows the proof of practical skills that are needed to be successful in our graduate programs. I think some of the drawbacks we're thinking about, some of the things about social economic status, like we've mentioned, can affect the applicants' ability to gain relevant experience, whether that's volunteering, whether that's doing undergraduate research. Some applicants question the relevancy of their experiences and can't connect between what they're doing and how that's relevant to their applicant. I remember I was working with a student here at Georgia State who did 3 different codathons where he was working with a group of computer science students and they were doing the hackathon. It was a great experience and he got a lot out of it. And on his resume that he had on the very bottom as a volunteer experience, but he was applying to graduate programs in computer science and they wanted to see that at the top of that resume because they wanted to make sure that that co-curricular experience was part of that strong application that he could put forward. I think it's really understanding the role of privilege and the impact on resumes and those types of experiences, and providing a consistent format for applicants to follow. A lot of graduate programs are using a resume service where you can literally just put the information in. It standardized the resume across the different different fields. So it really gives you kind of a standard approach and format. So I want to shift to our fourth poll question around interviews. So if we could pop that poll up. Are you using structured interviews to evaluate your applicants? Answers are flying in. Everybody, a few more seconds on that. If you look at this is interesting to me because usually, and I've done this session a couple of times now, in the past, I've seen this question come up. I've used this question, and what I've seen is the majority, by a large amount, are not doing structured interviews. But kudos to the folks on the call today for doing structured interviews. That 43% that's there. Clearly, there's some folks here who've taken the interview process seriously. For those of you who aren't doing structured interviews, if you want to know more about it, I think it's a great opportunity to really take a hard look at. COVID really impacted the way in which we do graduate enrollment management and how we manage our admissions process, our recruiting process, how we get our students through our programs. And one of the things in terms of graduate recruitment and graduate admissions, I think that got impacted the most was the way in which we do interviews. Both at Georgia State and at the University of Kansas, when I was in graduate admissions, when I'm working with graduate faculty, a lot of times those interviews were done in person pre-COVID. And when COVID hit, we were able to really kind of spin and turn and think about doing these virtually and doing them virtually. I think it's really important, though, that a graduate program take a real thoughtful approach and look at what exactly are we expecting out of an interview. Because it's a great way to get at the student's aspirations. It's a great way to pick up both verbal and nonverbal communication skills and tap into those and see those skills displayed. It really gives us more insight into our applicants, allows us to ask additional questions about specific points in the application, and it may be one of the best ways to get a perspective on the applicant before they arrive to our campus. However, we know about interview bias, right? We know that they can be influenced by conscious and unconscious bias. And we know that unstructured interviews tend not to provide information that they need to make an informed decision, and that some students might have a disadvantage due to cultural differences. Whether it's the ability to have a space to do or the technology to do a real high quality virtual interview. The idea that how can we understand it and appreciate how different our applicant pool is in terms of the cultural differences, and how can we try to mitigate that by ensuring that our interviews standardize, put a rubric to that to make sure that as part of our overall review process, we have that in place. And we need to be intentional about the purpose of the interview. Again, going back to what's the purpose of this? What do we hope to gain from this? And be able to document that onto our rubric so that our admissions committee can see that. So I've gone through pretty quickly a really robust amount of information, but I did that so that we could have a conversation about it. But if you don't remember anything today, remember this chart right here, looking at the criteria purpose, the benefits, some of the drawbacks with our criteria, and how to mitigate those drawbacks. This is one of those things where when you get the PowerPoint slide, take it to your graduate faculty members, take it to your colleagues across campus and say, how are we dealing with the drawbacks in these areas? How are we using these mitigation strategies to make sure that we meet those drawbacks head on, and that we really understand the purpose of each part of our graduate criteria that we're asking for, our application criteria. Do we really understand why we're asking for these things and how they inform our practice in terms of graduate recruitment, how they informed our practice in terms of reviewing our applicants in a robust way, but in a way that ensures diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as I mentioned before, the holisticadmissions.org website is a great resource with plenty of information that's out there. And I encourage you, if you haven't gone out, take a look at it, download some of the things that we talked about today. There's a lot more that I didn't cover that's on there as well. If you have questions, concerns, or thoughts about the GRE, the website's there to answer your questions there as well. I'm providing my email. Please email me. Let me know if you have any questions, concerns about ETS, about the GRE, and the helpline's there if you need that as well. But with that, I'm going to turn it on to the Q&A session.
All right, John, so far, I don't see any questions from our participants, but I do have some others that have come up in the background. So anybody who is still on, make sure that you throw some questions in there if you have some for John. And John, I am going to start with a few that I have gotten in the background here. When you talk about interviews, when you talked about how to maybe process those and handle them, how long would you suggest interviews be? And how many people would you suggest should be a part of that? You know, sometimes they get too big, sometimes there's only one or two. What are your thoughts?
Let me say this. My thoughts are this. Well, back when we do this in person, they would be like, there'd be 9 faculty members and 1 student, and the student's just sweating. You can just see them like, oh, I don't know what's, maybe not the best practice. My suggestion is the following. If you're going to do video interviews, no fewer than 3, no more than 5, because that 3 to 5 range really gives you a group of folks to work with that's manageable, get you a good quality input. And I'm a firm believer, 30 to 45 minutes. 30 is on the low end, 45 is on the high end. And I have silly logic to part of that. Part of the silly logic I bring to that is a lot of our undergrads take classes that are 50 minutes long. So it's really in our mindset. And think about it, as instructors, we teach 50-minute courses. So it's kind of, for a lot of us, very comfortable in that 15-minute time span. And I think there's also kind of a human factor of any more than that, it's hard to keep attention for 45 minutes in an interview like that. So you want to make sure and keep that focused. And it also pushes out maybe questions that you don't need to ask and really says, okay, we only got 45 minutes. We've got these 8 or 10 questions we're going to ask. Let's go forward and move on. And the great thing is about video interviews is that I know some graduate programs I work with, they'll record the video interviews because you can do that with technology, and they'll embed those into the review of the process. So if I'm on the admissions committee, I don't have to interview every student, but I can watch the interviews if I want as part of my review process. So again, using that rubric as your template, kind of push those interviews that way.
Great. And then you talked about some of the bias that could occur in an application process. You spoke about even comparing GPAs at another institution that faculty might think is higher than what is at their own. How much grade inflation do you think is an issue in admissions, and how is it to even be evaluated? Do you have any thoughts on GPAs?
Yeah, this is just my personal bias. I'm not a huge fan of comparing GPAs across. I think that universities should have standards, and the standard for a lot of programs is somewhere between 2.7 to 3.0, depending on the university and reasons for that. And most universities have a clause where if you have below the standard, you can still be considered, but maybe you come in on a probationary status. That's great. I think I'd rather have my admissions committee spend more time on the courses they took, A better understanding of the undergrad institution. I'll give you an example of that. When I was at Kansas, we had a really strong chemistry program. We had a strong pharmaceutical chemistry program and medicinal chemistry program. We were getting really good applicants from Puerto Rican campuses, from the UPR system, Mayagüez, Calle, there's a third one that escaped my mind, but we didn't know anything about them. And they were coming to me I was at the time an assistant dean in the grad school, and they were coming to me and saying, what about this school? Do you know about this school? I don't know about this school. I can't know about thousands of schools across the United States and the world. What we did was this: I cobbled some money together, got some money from this pocket and that pocket. We put a little money together. We took 4 faculty down, including myself, so 5 folks, and we spent 5 days in Puerto Rico. I know what you're thinking, boondoggle. It wasn't, though. I made them work. Every day we were visiting campus, talking to faculty, going to their facilities, looking at their research, understanding where those programs were. And we invested time in that so that when we came back, we could say, oh yeah, we know that faculty member. We know their program. We understand their chemistry department. And we started to see an uptick of applications from those schools. Many of your programs might have 2, 3, or 4 schools that we would call feeder schools because we consistently see applications from there. Spend some time, get your faculty thinking about what's that school like, understanding that, and get them off the, well, 3.4 here versus the 3.6 there. It's a useless conversation. Have them understand the faculty of that program and understand when those students come to our graduate program, we know they're prepared because we've understood that undergraduate institution.
I like that. That's great advice, John. Thanks. So we have a question in the chat. It's kind of a 2-part question. How many people do you think should be on the admission committee? And then let's say you're trying to narrow down your applicants from 100 down to 35 to 40 to make your offers. How much time should that committee allot for the roundtable and trying to land on narrowing down their pool? Do you have any suggestions on that?
Wow. Okay, Nadine, that's a great question. Okay, let me try to unpack it. First of all, depends on the department, because some departments are, think of it this way. Do you remember that game, Trivial Pursuit, and they had little wedges, right? Some of our departments are organized like wedges, and each wedge has to have a representative. So like, I give you an example, anthropology. For their PhD program might have biology, right? Biological anthropology, sociological anthropology, different flavors of anthropology. And every little wedge wants their person on the admissions committee. So an admissions committee that could be 3 to 5 people might have to be 5 to 7 based on the department. So the department's area of focus should drive who's on the admissions committee, right? It shouldn't be, I served on the admissions committee for 20 years and I'm still going to do it. It might be time to bring somebody new into that space. So think about that program. Now, master's, PhD, there's that as well. For that size of program where you're getting like 100 applications, you can try to put it down to 35. Using that initial review, like I was talking earlier about maybe using GRE scores, GPA. Again, don't use a number, use a range. So we're not using cutoff scores. We're using a range, and you can start to grade out. Think of it that way. So if you've got 100 applicants and you can look at GPAs, you can look at undergraduate students. Maybe you have a set that says we're going to value this set of schools that they're coming from. But think about at least 4 to 6 ways in which you can grade that out in an Excel spreadsheet and kind of create a grading level, and you can cluster those and say, oh yeah, this cluster is definitely in, this stuff is strong consideration, this is, we want to talk about this group, and then maybe, okay, we're going to hold on this group right now to get at that 35 to 45, that's more manageable. But again, multiple sources of information to make that grading process work. I have seen programs do this with 120, 130 applications. They're not using cutoff scores, they're using ranges, their point values are in ranges, and really allows them to have that admissions committee work. But it may take that admissions committee assigning 1 or 2 people to do that work initially, and then bringing that back to the larger admissions committee to do that work. I think I got all that in that question.
I think so. I think you did. They need to
Okay.
come back and clarify if we need to. So
Well, she
another,
said thank you, so that's a plus.
yeah. So John, do you have advice on determining merit-based scholarships based on application strength? Would you put more weight on the GPA, work experience, exams, or some other form?
Merit-based scholarships at the graduate level need to be a reflection of the program values. So what does the program value? That's a harder question to answer, but that's a question that only can be answered by the staff and faculty involved with that graduate program. So if the program values, for example, we're a professionally oriented program at the master's level. I'll give you a great example. I've got a philosophy, religious studies master's degree here at Georgia State. It's a fantastic program, has corporate partners, but it's an applied program, right? And applied in nature, it really allows that student to earn an MA degree, write a thesis, and really professionally oriented, because you can work with an MA in religious studies in, for example, nonprofit work, working in hospitals, in end of life care. There's many things there. So they have a scholarship and they value things like work experience. They value things like writing samples. They value things like interviews more than they value things like more quantitative in nature. I've got a philosophy MA degree though. They're seeing themselves as, well, now we're going to prepare really good students to be great students into PhD programs. So they're more going to value more things, more quantitative side, things like GPA, things like GRE scores, because that's what they've determined based on the value of that program. In other words, it says we value these things because of who we are as a program, and that's reflected in our merit-based scholarships.
John, thank you so much. I think we are at the end of our hour. So if anybody has additional questions or is reviewing this at later point, as it's going to be recorded, it'll be on the NAGAP website. Your contact information was in one of these slides, right?
Yep.
So definitely go back through. If you have questions, reach out to John and anyone at ETS that can help answer that as well. So John, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I forgot to make my last point, which is this. Tracy, you and I know this, and folks in the call know this too. If Tracy comes to Georgia State and says things that I say an hour earlier, it's like, oh my gosh, Tracy's wisdom is so amazing, right? It's somebody else's voice sometimes that comes in, and you may be saying the same things to your faculty, but somebody else's voice comes in, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And like, I said that an hour ago. The point I'm making is this. Through ETS, I've done a number of these campus visits where I come in virtually and talk to graduate faculty members about understanding the admissions criteria, holistic admissions, building rubrics. If it's something that interests you, reach out. We can definitely have a conversation about what that will look like for your campus. Because the reason I got involved with this is to get the conversation going. I am tired of 140 characters defining a conversation around graduate admissions. I want it to be a robust conversation. And the best way to do that is to do it at the campus level. So I'm happy to do that work. I've got colleagues that are happy to do that work. Please reach out and let us know.
Yes, thank you, John. I do agree with that sometimes bringing a separate voice to your faculty, your campus helps to reiterate what you have been saying. Somebody just asked where this slide deck will be. It will be on the NAGAP website under our past webinar link. It will be open for public viewing, so it's not just for NAGAP members, so you can feel free to share it. When ETS is our sponsor or any of our sponsors have a webinar, those are there for public. I tend to send those to several of my faculty when they have certain questions, and I know exactly, I can say, John just talked about this, so let me send you this webinar. So feel free to share it. It'll be on there probably in a few days. It needs to get loaded and uploaded onto the website. So give it a few days and it'll be up there. So John, thank you so much for spending an hour with us, and thanks to ETS for sponsoring this conversation. It's always important to keep adding to the admissions conversation so we can get our best and brightest on our campuses. So thank you so much. All right. Bye, everybody.